Sophia Bennett once believed there were some loves that, if they were deep enough, long enough, and painful enough, never truly disappeared, but simply lay still somewhere beneath the dust of time, waiting for the day people became mature enough to return and understand why things had not worked out back then. She believed that with a very hidden part of herself, the part she never brought up at dinners with friends, never admitted when her mother asked why she always found reasons to leave kind men before they could become serious, never said aloud to herself on those Seattle nights, when the rain dragged on so long the windows of her apartment looked as if they were crying on behalf of the city. She had a stable life, a good job, a carefully managed savings account, a bright rented apartment, a small circle of friends who understood her well enough not to ask questions that made her uncomfortable. But underneath all of that, Ethan Cole still existed like an old room no one had ever cleaned out, where the light always fell on the most beautiful corner, where the promises of her 20s had not yet been stained by bills, debt, failure, and human nature. So on a late November night, when Sophia sat alone on the cold kitchen floor of the house she and Ethan had bought less than 4 months earlier, her back against the white wooden cabinets, her knees drawn up, surrounded by bank papers, unopened bills, credit card statements, a half-finished bottle of red wine, and her phone lighting up with the message, "Don't wait up," sent at 12:47 a.m. What hurt her most was not that he was not coming home. What hurt her most was that she still remembered another man, also named Ethan, who had once stood in the rain outside her University of Washington dorm for 40 minutes just because her bus was late, then smiled as if being soaked through the collar of his shirt was a privilege, and told her he would never let her wait alone. The 20-year-old girl in her memory had believed that sentence so deeply, she kept it as a kind of proof of love. The 36-year-old woman on the kitchen floor now looked at the phone screen and understood, with a clarity so late it felt cruel, that maybe what she had loved for 12 years was not Ethan, but the story she had kept writing for him during all the years he was gone. The house in North Seattle that they bought after the wedding had once been a dream Sophia described in very practical terms, so she would not have to admit how romantic it felt. She told Nora, her best friend, that it was a reasonable investment, a good neighborhood, the interest rate high but still manageable, the small yard easy to maintain, the commute to work not too bad if she left early. She told her parents that buying a house, instead of renting forever, was a necessary step into adulthood. She told Ethan that the house gave them a foundation. But inside, when she first stood before the charcoal-colored front door, looking at the rain-soaked bushes, the little porch, and the pale light spilling through the living room windows, she had thought of something else. Finally, the story left unfinished at 20 had a next chapter. Finally, the girl who had once stood at the bus station watching Ethan leave Seattle, trying to keep her face calm while her heart split open, had been compensated. Finally, her first love was no longer just a what-if, but a key in her hand, a mortgage, a dining table waiting to be placed, a cream-colored sofa Ethan said they should buy even though her credit card was almost maxed out because, "I don't want us living like two people temporarily staying in our own lives." When he said that, Sophia placed the order for the sofa and told herself the money could be handled later. Because with Ethan, so many things that should have been examined carefully always got pushed aside by a beautiful sentence. That night, the house no longer looked like a dream. It looked like a crime scene. The living room was dark, the cream-colored sofa pale beneath the streetlight leaking through the unfinished curtains. The dining table only had 4 chairs, though Ethan had once said they should buy 6 because one day the house will be fuller. On the refrigerator was still a list of things to do after moving in. Install shelves, call the plumber about the upstairs faucet, choose a paint color for Ethan's office, call the bank about the escrow account, ask Ethan about the pilot campaign transfer. The last line was in Sophia's handwriting, smaller than the others, as if even on paper she had already begun to fear her question taking up too much space. She looked at it for a long time, then looked back at the phone screen as it went dark again. "Don't wait up." 3 words were not enough to end a marriage, but they were enough for Sophia to realize that this marriage was being built out of empty spaces she kept filling with excuses. At 20, Sophia met Ethan in the University of Washington library on a cold, rainy day. The kind of Seattle rain that did not fall in anger, but quietly clung to coats, hair, windows, and people's moods. She was a second-year marketing student then, the kind of student who lived by color-coded class schedules, highlighters, to-do lists, and the belief that a person could avoid many tragedies by reading the instructions carefully before signing anything. Her father was an accountant in Tacoma, her mother taught third grade, and both of them loved her, but were so practical that sometimes Sophia's youth felt a little short of air. From childhood, she had been taught that love mattered, but so did health insurance, that dreaming was not wrong. But the electric bill did not care whether someone had a beautiful heart. Ethan entered her life, like a living argument against all of those lessons. He studied business but often sat in the literature section of the library, where the yellow lights fell over the tall shelves and where he said it felt like people once believed in things bigger than having a stable job. He had slightly long dark brown hair, gray-blue eyes, a crooked smile, and a kind of confidence that made people uns. Whether he was too arrogant or simply too hungry to be seen. The first time they spoke, Sophia was underlining a passage in a book about consumer behavior. Ethan sat at the opposite table, looked at her for a moment, then asked, "Do you like things that are true or only things that can be proven?" Sophia looked up, ready to be annoyed, but his eyes were not mocking. They were curious. It was as if he had seen in her a door she had not known she was locked. From that day on, Ethan gradually appeared in the empty spaces of her life. At the cafe near the library, where he drew company ideas on napkins and forgot to drink his latte until it went cold. On the steps outside the lecture hall, where he waited for her after class just to hand her a book, he said, "Read this. You'll hate it in a really interesting way." On rainy evenings, when he drove his old car across the Montlake Bridge, the windows fogged with breath, music playing low, his hand finding hers between the seats like a habit formed before it even had a name. Ethan did not love like cautious men did. He loved with sentences that made another person feel their life had suddenly acquired cinematic depth. He told Sophia she was the only one who made him want to become a more reliable version of himself. He said someday he would build something big, not just to make money, but to prove wrong everyone who had once looked at him like some scholarship kid from Spokane. He said one day she would stand beside him when people asked who had believed in him from the beginning. Sophia listened and believed that she was not only loved, but chosen to witness the rise of an extraordinary man. That feeling was powerful for a young woman used to being reasonable. Ethan made her feel she was not only reasonable, he made her feel she could be the reason someone became great. The red flags from college did not disappear. Memory only softened them. Ethan was often late, then told a story compelling enough to make lateness seem like the consequence of a life larger than a schedule. He borrowed small amounts of money and paid them back late because student cash flow is ridiculous. He changed plans suddenly because of a new idea, someone he needed to meet, an opportunity that could not be missed. He hated being asked anything too specific. If Sophia asked whether he had submitted his internship applications, he would laugh and say she made everything sound like an audit. If she asked about his plan after graduation, he would pull her clothes and say someone like him could not live according to a safe path. When she got angry, he softened at exactly the right moment, touching the part of her that wanted to be seen. "I know I worry you," he said one night in his messy rented room, surrounded by books, jackets, and a rough pitch deck. "But you're the only person who makes me afraid of disappointing anyone." Sophia believed that confession was a sign of vulnerability. She did not realize it was also his way of placing emotional responsibility on her. If he failed, he would not be the only one who failed. Her faith in him would fail too. First love can make people confuse dependence with intimacy, confuse being needed with being loved. They broke up at the end of college, in a rented room with a window facing a wet street, when the future demanded for the first time that both of them speak clearly in terms that could not be decorated with poetry. Sophia had received an offer in Seattle, not a high salary, but stable with a path, insurance, and a decent manager. Ethan wanted to go to San Francisco with two friends to develop a platform he believed would change the way local brands connected with communities. Sophia asked about funding, ownership, housing, timelines, and the backup plan if fundraising failed. Ethan grew quieter and quieter, then smiled sadly. "You always want to turn a dream into a spreadsheet," she answered, trying not to cry, "because dreams need rent money too." That sentence made him look at her as if she had just joined everyone who had ever failed to believe in him. They fought not violently but deeply. Ethan said she loved safety more than she loved him. Sophia said he confused being trusted with never being questioned. He said one day she would see him succeed, and wonder why she had not been brave enough to stand beside him. She cried, but she did not go with him. On the day he left Seattle at the bus station under a gray sky, he held her tightly, his mouth against her hair, and said, "It's not over. It's just the wrong time." That sentence was more beautiful than the truth, so Sophia kept it. Wrong time was far more comforting than admitting their love had already contained a cruel mechanism. Ethan needed to be trusted unconditionally, while Sophia needed to be respected enough for her questions not to be treated as betrayal. Those two needs had collided when they were young. She left the collision, but she did not leave the memory. 12 years later, Sophia had become the woman her 20-year-old self once hoped she would be. Not dazzling in the social media sense, not rich enough to stop checking restaurant prices, but steady. She was the director of marketing strategy for a mid-sized software company, with a glass office that looked out at the rain, a team that trusted her, and the ability to sit in meetings with men who talked too much and interrupt with a politeness so sharp they thanked her after being correct. She ran around Green Lake on Sunday mornings, went to farmers' markets, kept a habit of tracking expenses, and transferred money into savings before spending anything else. Her best friend, Nora, once said Sophia lived like someone always preparing for a storm that had not arrived yet. Sophia laughed, but Nora was not wrong. She had loved a few men after Ethan, and each had left behind some evidence that her heart still worked, but refused to open the door all the way. Mark, the divorce lawyer, always on time, always polite, always saying, "I want to build a stable future," made Sophia feel as if she were looking at a model home too clean for anyone to live in. Julian, the photographer, made her laugh, but turned every question about commitment into a discussion about freedom. Aaron, who worked in tech, was so kind that she almost hated herself for not loving him enough. None of them was wrong in an obvious way. They simply were not Ethan, or more precisely, none of them was the room in memory where Ethan had been the first to occupy space. That was something Sophia rarely admitted, because she was smart enough to know memory was not a fair measuring stick. But knowing something is unfair does not mean the heart stops using it. Ethan's Facebook message came on a March evening, while Sophia was editing a presentation for the next morning's meeting, a cold cup of tea beside her laptop. "Hey, it's been a long time." She looked at the name Ethan Cole and felt her body react before reason could enter the room. Her heart beat faster, her mouth went dry, her hand froze on the keyboard. His profile picture was taken in a dark bar, his hair shorter than before, light stubble on his face, his eyes still holding that look as if he knew something other people did not. Sophia stood up, got water, and told herself she was not the 20-year-old girl anymore. Then she replied, "It has." At first, the conversation was light, almost careful, like two people walking through an old house without daring to touch the furniture. He asked if she was still in Seattle. She asked where he lived now. He said he had just come back after years in San Francisco, Portland, Austin. Some wins, some expensive lessons. The phrase sounded both mature and mysterious, exactly like Ethan. He said he had thought about her more than he probably should have. Sophia set the phone down after that and sat looking at the rain outside her apartment window. She knew Ethan always knew how to say the sentence that made people open the door. But there are some doors people never truly lock. When they met again at a small restaurant in Capitol Hill, Sophia arrived 10 minutes early and hated herself for being early. She wore a black sweater, jeans, light makeup, trying to look like someone who had not spent too much time getting ready, even though she had tried on 3 shirts beforehand. Ethan walked in through the rain, and time played a cruel trick. It did not return him to her whole, but kept enough of him intact for memory to recognize. He still had the crooked smile, the confident walk, the way his eyes found her in the room as if everyone else were background. But his face was sharper, the tired lines around his eyes deeper, his smile seemingly practiced through too many negotiations. He hugged her longer than an old friend should. Sophia smelled woodsy cologne, the faintest trace of alcohol, and the expensive fabric of his coat. Part of her noticed that it did not quite match the story of just getting through a hard season. But another part of her said people were allowed to keep a few beautiful things after a difficult life. They sat down. The first minutes were awkward, then memory did what it did best. Selected the warm scenes and projected them onto the wall of the present. Ethan mentioned the cupcake with the candle the rain had put out. Sophia mentioned the napkin, where he had drawn his company idea. He looked at her with a softness that was either very real or very skillful. "I thought about you more than I should have," he said. Sophia smiled and looked down at her wine. "You always say the right thing," He tilted his head. Is that an accusation? Maybe a memory. Ethan was quiet for a moment, then said he had not always been a good man after leaving Seattle. That should have made her cautious, but under the warm light, it sounded like a man mature enough to look back at himself. He told her about failure, about his first startup collapsing because his partners were too green, about an investor pulling out at the last minute, about a woman who once loved him but couldn't handle me before I won, about a time when he nearly lost everything, and how that had taught him that vision was not enough without the right person beside him. Sophia listened and noticed a faint pattern. In every story, Ethan had been abandoned, misunderstood, not believed in enough by others, but his own responsibility appeared only like a distant shadow. She noticed it, then let it go, not because she was stupid, because people do not believe only with reason. She was sitting across from the person who had once been the biggest question of her life, and the old closeness returned without asking permission. Ethan looked at her as if she were the only one who still held the version of himself he wanted to find again. For Sophia, that was very hard to resist. The months that followed felt like a film edited too beautifully for the person inside it to notice the background music changing tone. Ethan took Sophia through their old places. The university library had changed its tables and chairs. The cafe on University Way had changed owners, but still smelled like espresso and wet books. They drove across Montlake in the rain, and Ethan placed his hand over hers, saying, "Maybe time didn't take us away. Maybe it just made us take the long way around so we'd know what we missed." Sophia laughed because it was so Ethan, but she did not pull her hand away. He did not ask her to help him right away. He did something more dangerous. He let her want to help. He talked about a new project, a platform connecting small businesses with local communities through behavioral data, personalized content, and micro-campaigns. He said it was not another reckless attempt, but the last time he would do it right. He said he had learned humility, learned to slow down, learned to choose the right person beside him. He said the people from his past had left because they only loved the version of him after he succeeded. Sophia listened and felt herself being placed before a very old door. Either trust him and become the special one, or ask too many questions and become just another person who did not understand him. Nora saw it early. One night in Ballard, while Sophia described how much Ethan had changed, Nora put down her wineglass and looked at her for a long time. "You're talking about him like an old movie just got a sequel." Sophia laughed. "Maybe it kind of did. No, that's the problem. Life doesn't have clean sequels. 12 years is a long time, Soph. You don't know him now?" Sophia frowned. "I know Ethan." Nora shook her head. "You know 22-year-old Ethan, and you know the Ethan you've remembered for 12 years. Those two may not be the man sitting in front of you." Sophia felt annoyed. "He's been through a lot. He's honest about his failures. Is he honest about his role in those failures?" The question hung between them like a hook. Sophia drank her wine and did not answer. Nora softened her voice. "I don't hate him. I'm just afraid you're trying to save a memory from its natural death." Sophia, said Nora, did not understand the way Ethan looked at her. Nora replied, "I'm afraid that because you remember the way he used to look at you, you're not looking closely enough at the way he's looking at you now." That sentence hurt Sophia, so she got angry. And because she was angry, she clung harder to Ethan, as if proving Nora wrong would also prove her love right. Whether by accident or design, Ethan always appeared at exactly the right time after conversations like that. He sent photos of the old bridge. He brought soup when she had a cold. He called when she worked late and said he only wanted to hear her voice. He was not entirely fake. That was the dangerous part. The people who use others best are not always emotionless. They can feel something real. It is just that their feelings always yield to their own needs first. 6 months later, Ethan proposed on the Oregon coast on a day of hard wind. The sea was gray, the sand wet, the waves breaking against the rocks with a sound that was both majestic and cold. He knelt without too much drama, holding a vintage ring he said he found in a little shop because you don't belong to anything mass-produced. He said he had lost her once because he had been too young, too proud, too afraid of not being enough. He said he did not want to spend one more day pretending anyone else could replace her. "What if we stop wasting time?" he asked. Sophia cried before she could think. That question was not only a proposal. It turned every caution into waste, every pause into betrayal of the past, every warning into the cowardice of someone too afraid to accept the gift fate had returned. She said yes. Her mother was happy but worried. Her father asked about Ethan's finances, his work plans, old debts. Sophia found herself defending Ethan, with an intensity that would later make her ache to remember. "I've known him longer than anyone," she said. Nora, when she heard, only replied, "No, you've remembered him longer than anyone." This time, Sophia did not speak to Nora for a week. The wedding was small, but more expensive than Sophia expected. Ethan said he wanted it simple, but every time she suggested cutting something, he said they did not need extravagance, only something worthy of our story. And because their story had been unfinished for 12 years, Sophia always felt that cutting anything would somehow insult the ending they had been given late. She paid for most of it. Ethan said his cash was tied up in the project. The funding round would fix things soon, and he would make it up to her. Sophia did not ask for paperwork, not because she did not know she should. She knew too well, but asking Ethan for paperwork felt like declaring that she did not fully trust him. And their entire reunion had been built on the idea that she was different from the people who had not believed. After the wedding, Ethan pushed for buying a house. Renting, he said, made him feel like they still had one foot out the door. "I want to know we're really betting on this," he said one evening while they were viewing the house in North Seattle. Sophia should have heard the word betting, but she heard the word we. She used most of her savings for the down payment. Ethan contributed less, his face growing heavy whenever she tried to talk about the proportion. "I don't want you to feel like I'm making you carry this," he said. Sophia held his hand and said the sentence she would later hate most. "We're married." Every time she said it, she gave another piece of her right to check reality over to love. The money started small, then grew, paying off Ethan's credit card debt, because he called it a relic from a dark period, transferring money for a pilot campaign, because he said if they did not lock in the software contractor immediately, the opportunity would be gone, taking out a small loan in her name because Sophia's credit was better, and Ethan said it was only a bridge for a few months, paying for furniture because he wanted the house to feel trusted. When Sophia asked for details, Ethan was gentle at first, kissing her forehead, saying he knew she worried, but he was building something for both of them. When she asked again, he became tired. When she asked a third time, he became wounded. "Don't you trust me?" That question silenced her, because if she said yes, she had to stop asking. If she said no, the entire story of returning to and marrying her first love collapsed. Ethan learned very quickly that Sophia's trust was not only an emotion, it was an identity. She had chosen him against Nora, against her parents, against time, reason, and the past. Any evidence against him was also evidence against her own choice. And someone trying to prove that her choice was not wrong can endure many things before calling them by their true names. The marriage did not collapse immediately. It tilted slowly. Ethan was gone more often. Investor meetings, networking nights, trips to Portland, Vancouver, Bellevue, calls with advisors, brainstorming sessions that stretched late into the night. He came home smelling faintly of alcohol, eyes bright from having been listened to by someone, or exhausted because people don't understand the vision. Sophia tried to create a normal space. She cooked dinner, bought a new blanket for the living room, placed a small plant by the window, suggested they have one night without phones. Ethan agreed at first, then forgot. When she said they no longer truly talked, he smiled tiredly. "You're overthinking. You always did." That sentence pulled the 20-year-old version of her into the room to testify against the woman she was now. It was true that she used to overthink, true that she needed plans, true that Ethan used to tease her for turning everything into a spreadsheet. But back then, in her memory, the teasing had love in it. Now it served a different function. It made her reasonable questions sound like an old symptom. Sophia began censoring herself. She practiced not asking immediately when he came home late. Practiced saying, "You must be tired," instead of "Where were you?" Practiced swallowing the unease when he turned his phone face down. Practiced believing that supporting a man rebuilding his career required extraordinary patience. But her body did not cooperate. It woke at 1 a.m. when he was not home. It tightened when the bank sent a notice. It went cold when Ethan said, "Not tonight," every time she suggested reviewing the finances. The heart can be persuaded by memory, but the body is where truth knocks first. One night in September, Ethan said he had a meeting with an investor in Bellevue. He kissed Sophia quickly on the cheek and told her not to wait. But at that point, "Don't wait" was still wrapped in a smile. The next morning, Sophia found a receipt on the kitchen table. Capitol Hill 11, 36 p.m. 2 cocktails, 1 dessert. Not Bellevue. She held the receipt so long the paper warmed in her hand. When Ethan came down to the kitchen, hair damp from the shower, he looked at the receipt and then at her, not panic. That lack of panic made her cold. "I stopped somewhere else afterward," he said. With whom? Someone in the network. You said you were in Bellevue. He sighed, as if she had chosen to ruin a morning. Sophia, what are you turning this into? I'm asking where you were. You're being paranoid. The word fell between them like a label he had prepared in advance. Sophia remembered Ethan in college saying he hated lies, because he had grown up in a family where everyone avoided the truth, until no one believed anyone anymore. He once told her on a rainy night that if he ever became the person who made her doubt her own instincts, she should leave. Now that man stood in the kitchen, lying so clumsily it was almost insulting, then called her recognition paranoia. Sophia did not keep arguing. That made Ethan think he had won. But inside her, an old mechanism switched on. The mechanism of a woman raised by an accountant and a teacher. A woman who knew that when words became slippery, paperwork was usually where the truth still left marks. She began checking the finances, slowly at first, almost ashamed. She told herself she only needed to understand so she could worry less. Then each transaction line opened like a crack in the wall. The software contractor payment went to a personal account with no contract. The market research trip matched the weekend Ethan said he was in Portland, but the card was charged in Vancouver, Canada. The money Sophia transferred for the pilot campaign had gone toward an old personal debt. Several investments, Ethan said, were locked in, had no confirmation documents. A demand letter from a landlord in San Francisco sat in a secondary email account he had forgotten to log out. An email from a man named Milo Reed. You can't keep pitching the same story and leaving other people holding the bag. Sophia read that sentence near 2 in the morning in the small home office, the blue screen light washing over her face. She could not breathe evenly, not because Ethan had debt. People could have debt, could fail, could feel ashamed. What chilled her was the pattern. Ethan entered other people's lives with a story about a grand future. He accepted their faith, their money, their support. And when responsibility came due, he called the person demanding clarity someone who did not understand him. Sophia had thought she was the exception, because she had known him before everything went wrong. But maybe she was only the person with the most memories for him to use. The name Leila Monroe appeared through a hotel charge in Belltown. On the exact night Ethan said he had slept at a friend's place because the meeting ran late. Sophia did not hire a private investigator, did not follow him, did not turn herself into a character in a story she once despised. She only opened the old iPad Ethan had once used with her, where his email was still logged in, and searched. Leila Monroe was a freelance brand designer who worked with Ethan on the pilot project. The messages between them did not look like a great love, and somehow that made them more horrifying. They were intimate, practical, casual, full of the kind of jokes exchanged by two people who believed the third person in the story was too far away to see. Leila wrote, "Does your wife still think this is all for the grand comeback?" Ethan replied, "Sophia wants to believe in the version of me she missed. I'm not going to argue with free faith." Sophia set the iPad down because the air left the room. Free faith, she thought of every time she had defended him to Nora, to her parents, to herself. Thought of the savings transferred away. Thought of the house. Thought of the ring. Thought of the first love story she had kept clean in her heart for 12 years. In Ethan's mouth, it was just free faith, a resource that cost him nothing. She kept reading, though every line felt like cutting herself. Leila knew he was married. She was not jealous, not demanding, not pretending innocence. She understood Sophia's role in the system. The romantic wife willing to finance nostalgia. The affair was not the worst part. The worst part was that Ethan did not seem swept away by another love. He simply arranged people according to usefulness. Leila gave him branding, hotel beds, and complicity. Sophia gave him money, a house, memories, and faith. He did not love anyone enough to be honest. He only needed each person standing in the right place. Confrontation happened in the living room on a night of heavy rain, not in the kitchen, because Sophia did not want the kitchen where she had waited for him so many times to become the backdrop of humiliation again. She placed the papers on the coffee table. Statements, emails, screenshots, transactions, messages with Leila. Ethan came home close to 11, coat wet, hair damp, face tired but not entirely surprised to see her sitting there. Maybe some part of him always knew this day would come, but he believed he would speak beautifully enough to turn it into a misunderstanding that needed more time. He looked at the papers, then at Sophia. "You've been busy." The first sentence was not an apology. She said, "Sit down." He slowly took off his coat and hung it up, as if controlling the pace of the room was the last thing he still owned. "I don't like this tone. I don't like being used like a savings account." He sat down, his eyes moving over the documents. When he saw the messages with Leela, the corner of his mouth tight. It's complicated. Sophia gave a short, dry laugh. No, that sentence has expired. Ethan leaned back in the chair. What do you want me to say? The truth. He looked at her, and some of the familiar softness disappeared. The truth is, you walked into this with your eyes open. You knew who I was. Sophia was silent for a beat, not because he was right, but because the sentence was cruel in such a calculated way. No, she said. I knew who you were 10 years ago. Ethan gave a slight shrug. People change. No, they reveal themselves. He laughed quietly. Is that Nora talking, or the lawyer in your head? This is the woman who read the cash flow of her own marriage. He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the rain. I never forced you to give me money. You just made every question sound like betrayal. Because with you, everything has to be controlled. No, with you, anything another person wants clarified becomes control. He turned back, his eyes colder. You needed me as much as I needed you. That touched the deepest bruise in her, but this time she did not avoid it. Maybe, she said. Ethan stopped short because she did not deny it. Sophia continued. I needed the person I thought you used to be. I needed to believe that the part of my life I missed could come back and prove all my choices before this weren't losses. You saw that and you used it. Ethan looked at her for a long time, and for the first time that night, she saw him unable to find a beautiful sentence quickly enough. Then he said, you want to play the victim so you don't have to admit you wanted this story too. Sophia looked at the man who had once stood under the rain and said he would never leave her waiting. I'm not a victim because I wanted to believe, but you are a betrayer because you knew that and used it anyway. After that night, Sophia did not fall apart in a cinematic way. She did not smash a glass, did not stand in the rain, did not call Nora screaming. She woke up each morning and felt herself become slightly less than the day before. Ethan left the house for 2 days, saying he needed space. She did not ask where he went. The house became a place where every object testified. The cream-colored sofa was where he had once said they needed to feel like they were building a real life. The dining table was where she had signed transfers on her laptop. The bedroom was where she had lain beside him, staring at the ceiling and telling herself the distance was only pressure. In the closet, her wedding dress was sealed in a garment bag. On the living room shelf was their wedding photo from the Oregon coast, Ethan looking at her like a man who had just found home again. Sophia took the photo down, placed it on the table, and looked at it for a long time. She no longer recognized the woman in the picture, not because she looked younger, because she was looking at a man who did not exist and calling it destiny. The deepest pain was not losing money, though enough money was gone to make her nauseous when she looked at her account. It was not Leela, though the image of the free faith message sometimes stabbed her in the middle of ordinary things like washing her hands or making coffee. The deepest pain was losing the story of herself. Sophia had believed she was rational, cautious, not easily dazzled by beautiful words. But she had returned to Ethan, married him quickly, bought a house, transferred money, fought with Nora, reassured her parents, and called all of it courage. Now she had to look directly at the truth that the loneliness and nostalgia inside her had shaken hands with his manipulation. He had deceived her, but she had also cleared the path for the lie because she wanted it to lead to a beautiful ending. She decided not to beg Ethan to change. That was harder than she expected, because a part of her still wanted him to appear with the exact script of rescue. Crying, saying he panicked, saying Leela meant nothing, saying the money was only chaos, saying he loved her, saying he would go to therapy, be transparent, start over. A part of her still wanted the man in her memory to walk out and prove she had not been completely wrong. But Ethan did not come with remorse. He came with anger when she started cutting off the joint accounts. Sophia's lawyer, Camille Hart, was a woman with short silver hair, an office overlooking Elliott Bay, and a voice that was dry but not inhumane. After reviewing the papers, Camille said, "Do not let his emotions become your work schedule. From now on, everything in writing. Protect the remaining assets before you think about any conversation." Sophia opened her own account, redirected her paycheck, froze the joint card, notified the bank, and gathered evidence of the money she had given Ethan under the premise of shared investment. When Ethan realized, he called repeatedly. She did not answer. That night he came home, face tight, eyes red. "You're ruining both of us?" Sophia was placing documents into a folder. "No, I'm stopping you from using the word both when you mean you." He looked at her as if she had become a stranger. "You think a lawyer is going to make you clean. You signed, you transferred money, you wanted this house. I know. Then why are you acting like I stole everything? She turned around. Because you stole the truth first. The money only followed. Ethan stepped closer, his voice softening, using the old nickname like a key. Soph, we can fix this. I panicked. I felt like I wasn't enough for you, so I did stupid things. That name used to soften her. Now it sounded like fingernails scratching at an old lock. You didn't panic when you spent my money, she said. You didn't panic when you texted Leela that my faith was free. He went pale. I was angry. I said something stupid. No, you were comfortable. That's the scary part. The softness fell from his face. You're never going to find what you think you lost in me. Sophia felt the sentence strike the wound, but she did not fall. I know, she said, because it was never in you. It was in me. Leaving was not clean, not fast, not satisfying. The house had to be handled. Debts divided, banks called, lawyers sent letters. Ethan objected, then softened, then objected again. Leela disappeared from the story once things began to carry legal risk. The way people who only enjoy standing under lights often leave when the hospital room lights come on. Ethan told a few mutual acquaintances that Sophia turned cold, that she could not handle him rebuilding his career, that she loved an image and punished him for being a real person. That sentence was partly true enough to hurt her. She had loved an image, but he left out the part where he had sold tickets to that image, stood at the door, collected payment, and called it love. Nora came to help her pack. She did not say, I told you so. She just sat on the bedroom floor with tape and a marker, wrapping books, labeling boxes, letting Sophia cry when she found the old hoodie Ethan had worn in college, and she had kept through every move. Nora held the hoodie, looked at Sophia, and said, You're not stupid. A very smart part of you was convinced by a very lonely part of you. Sophia did not know whether that was comforting. Some days she believed it. Some days she hated it. Some days she wanted to call Ethan just to hear his voice. Some days she hated him so much she shook. Some days she hated herself more. Some days she drove over the Montlake Bridge and had to pull over because the memory of the 20-year-old girl in Ethan's car suddenly came alive, so clearly it felt as if she was letting a younger person die all over again. Leaving a first love does not feel like leaving a man. It feels like burying a version of yourself you had secretly kept alive in the basement for too long. Sophia's new apartment was much smaller than the house. It was on the 4th floor of an old building near Fremont, with windows looking out over wet rooftops and a corner of the canal, a narrow kitchen, floors that creaked lightly, and a bedroom just large enough for a bed and a desk. On moving day, Seattle rained as if the city did not know how to stage endings with sunlight. Sophia set the boxes down in the living room, sat on the floor, and leaned against the wall. Her phone was silent. Ethan had stopped calling after Camille's letter. He sent one final email, long, halfway between apology and accusation. You wanted a ghost and got angry when I was alive. I did love you in the way I could. You didn't lose me. You lost the story. Sophia read it once, then saved it to the evidence folder without replying. There had been a time when she would have analyzed every sentence, searching for a piece of the old Ethan, a piece of real love, a piece of remorse that might save the memory. Now she was too tired to dig for gold in mud. She made tea in a new kettle, drank from a white mug she bought quickly at Target, and looked around the apartment with no curtains yet, no art, no trace of anyone but herself. It did not make her happy. Not yet, maybe not for a long time. But there were no secret bills on the table. No man texting, don't wait up from somewhere. She was not allowed to know. No dream demanding she transfer more money to prove her faith. The silence here was cold, but it did not lie. A few months later, Sophia returned to the Oregon coast alone. Not to perform a beautiful ritual. She had to attend a conference in Portland. And on the way back, instead of driving straight up to Seattle, she veered off as if some old part of her had pulled the steering wheel. The wind was strong, the sea gray, the sand wet, the sky low. She stood where Ethan had proposed, her coat pulled tight, hair blown across her face. She thought she would cry more, but the tears did not come. Maybe she had cried enough in closed rooms. She took her wedding ring from her coat pocket and looked at it in her palm. She did not throw it into the sea. She did not want to turn the ocean into a trash can for another person's mistake. She placed the ring back into the small envelope to give to the lawyer with the rest of the assets. An action so practical it was almost brutal. But Sophia had learned that not every ending needed a scene. Some true endings happened in refusing to give memory another chance to make her perform. That night, after returning to the apartment, she opened the last box. Inside were a few college books, an old notebook, a handful of faded photographs. There was one picture of Sophia, and Ethan sitting on the steps of the library. Both of them so young it was almost unfair to look back. Ethan was smiling, leaning toward her, and Sophia was looking at him as if he had just opened a horizon. She held the photograph for a long time. She did not tear it up. She did not put it on a shelf. She took an envelope, placed the photo inside, and wrote on the outside, "What I thought I loved." Then she put it at the bottom of the box. Not to forget. Forgetting is a privilege not every wound grants. She put it away so she could remember correctly, so she would not turn Ethan into a complete monster, because that would be a lie too. He had once had real light, real tenderness, real ambition, but there was also a very large emptiness in him, where he drew other people's faith in so he could feel bigger. Sophia had once loved that light, and paid the price for not seeing how long its shadow stretched. Sophia did not lose Ethan in the way she had once feared. She lost the version of him that had never existed outside the memory she had cared for too long. She lost money, lost the house, lost the feeling that she was the kind of woman who never made mistakes for love, lost her last innocence toward beautiful sentences. But inside that loss was something cold and true. She found the part of herself she had given to the past to decide her present. First, love can be beautiful, but there are some loves that should only be allowed to live in the time already gone, where they cannot borrow money, cannot sign papers, cannot come home late, cannot call your suspicion paranoia, cannot turn faith into a resource. When someone drags a memory too beautiful into the present without looking at who is holding it now, they do not save love. They only offer their life to a ghost that knows how to speak in the voice of someone they once loved. And on a rainy night many months later, when Sophia's phone lit up with a message from an unknown number that said only, "I still think about you," she looked at it for a few seconds, then turned off the screen. She did not need to ask if it was Ethan. She did not need to answer. She did not need to prove she had moved on. She placed the phone face down, stood up, turned off the kitchen light, and walked toward her small bedroom. Outside the window, Seattle was still raining, the droplets stretching down the glass like lines no one would ever finish reading. Sophia survived, but she did not become who she had been before. Some soft part of her had died with the man in her memory. In its place was something less romantic, more uncomfortable, but more life-saving. The ability to look at something that had once been beautiful, admit that it had been beautiful, and still close the door before it could take anything else from her.